There's some striking analysis today on the makeup of these new teal seats. Lots of university-educated voters, incomes 2 to 3 times greater than the national average, and homes in some of the suburbs with a median price of $8 million plus. It's unlikely now they'll have the balance of power, but they'll still be very influential in the new parliament. As we've already seen, they're messing with the minds of Liberals on the moderate side who claim that to get these seats back, the Liberal Party has got to move even further to the left. Now, honestly, that is a death wish. The Libs have got themselves into this mess because they were Labor light, so you don't get out of it by being more of the same. It's a surefire way to end up in permanent opposition, as most of the state Liberal parties are now. There's a thoughtful piece from Lillian Andrews in The Australian today saying that the animosity of rich teal electorates is not because of climate change or women's equality. These are excuses, she says, that made them feel good about their vote. Underneath, it's because the Liberals have started to speak more about the daily lives of working class people than the pet causes of the socially smug doctors' wives. Oh, ouch. John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister, and Jennifer Oriel's a columnist at The Australian. As they do every Tuesday, they join me now. Great to have you both. I tell you what, Jennifer, on the issue of the teals, did Lillian Andrews get that right?
I think she's very unforgiving, but basically I think that the line that she, although very entertaining, but I think basically the line that this is a group that that has the money and the privileges to ignore bread and butter issues is correct. It's a phenomenon that's not just in Australia. It's been observed in America for at least a decade by academics like Charles Murray and even New York Times columnist David Brooks, who wrote very interesting work on the Bobos in Paradise. He called this group the Bobos, and he admitted that as he was one of them. He was from the left-leaning progressive cultural value media. He knew the people in that political class. He shared the same cultural tastes as they did. He was completely insulated from what was going on in broader America, and it was why Trump's election took them all by shock. They didn't realise and they didn't care to know about what was going on in broader America. And I think we're seeing that here. We have a class that is very, very wealthy, well-educated, and they have this buffer, they have this resilience to cost of living crises and the things that we really should have seen the Liberals focusing on a bit more in the lead up to the election. And the focus, I think, needs to shift now to the outer suburbs and the bush to get back some of those voters that they lost this time around.
Menzies said, John, the rich and powerful didn't need his support, nor the really poor, because the government welfare system and the left look after the really poor. He said the Liberal Party needed to be the voice of those in the middle, squeezed by taxes, carrying the country with their hard work and enterprise. That famous address, Forgotten People, it's 80 years old this week, but I tell you, I think it's never been more relevant, has it?
I agree with you. It's very relevant indeed. And I think it's incredibly important that the coalition work together to ensure that they do not miss the concerns and aspirations of the so-called forgotten people, the people who create the wealth, who do the hard work, provide us with our exports, all of that national income that the Greens basically want to throw away at the same time as they promise endless new social benefits. I think it's incredibly important to remember we can't have, I agree with a lot of what Jennifer said, important we recognise we don't have a capacity to see into the hearts of those teals, but they've got a challenge. Will they, like the aristocrats of old, be people of noblesse oblige who genuinely care about the rest of the community, or will they be Marie Antoinettes, let them eat cake, a sort of new expertocracy who pretend they know better for ordinary Australians than ordinary Australians know what is best for them? That is a great challenge, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I think that's important, but the early signs, I'd have to say, are a little discouraging. They need to stop and think. It's all very well to have never known what it is to struggle to meet a power bill. These are people who are post-material. That's a term that's often used now. They are wealthy to the point where a doubling or a tripling of a household power bill doesn't matter so much. Where if, you've got to move up to an expensive electric motor car, you can do it. They have to be able to walk a mile in the shoes of ordinary Australians. And it's critical that the coalition doesn't
I made the point last night, Jennifer, that underlying a lot of... Jennifer, sorry, there's a bit of a delay here, John. Jennifer, I made the point last night that underlying a lot of these teal seats are state seats that have already long gone to the left. Again, it's this wealthy virtue signalling push, but it's also because state Liberals have vacated the fields. They themselves have gone woke. That's the challenge for the Liberal Party. It's not just at a federal level. This has been a long-term, attrition away from their Conservative base. I mean, they've always had a moderate edge to them, but the moderates have always been held in check by the Conservatives, by Abbott and by John Howard at their most successful coming from opposition into government. But where they fall away is when they get fixated with causes on the left and their own base, their own people say, I don't know who you are anymore.
You're absolutely right, and John, that was so well said. But what I would say is that, what we're experiencing in Australia and what the Liberal Coalition, Nationals Coalition has experienced is not unusual. If you want to look at international examples, the best place to look is at the US Democrats and at New Labour in the UK, because they lost their working class base a long time ago, and there's been a real push in progressive parties around the world to reclaim their working class by de-emphasising political correctness, virtue signalling, and all of the concerns of the upper middle classes, and getting back in touch with the grassroots of their voter base. The Democrats are successful at doing that at the last election, and the Liberal coalition really needs to get back in touch with that. I think you're probably right that these seats shouldn't be abandoned, but this shouldn't be the focus of the Liberal coalition's plans for the future. They really need to think about what is their new base, and there is a new base. A third of Australians voted for anyone except the majors this time round. And also there's a growing gulf between urban seats and outer suburban and regional and rural seats. So there are a lot of demarcations in this election that haven't really been studied, because a lot of it's about the excitement of the Teals. It's the most exciting story. But there are a lot of undercurrents. There are a lot of battle lines drawn here that haven't existed before as clearly. And it really, the Liberal Nationals Coalition really needs to spend their time in opposition reviewing what happened at this election with a very broad view to what kind of party they want to be in the future, what kind of philosophy do they want to have, and how can they really advance forward, taking most of Australia with them.
John and Jennifer, I'll pick up that point before about outer suburban seats. We know, particularly in metropolitan Melbourne, in dead red, so very strongly Labor seats, there were double-digit swings away from Labor. That's telling you that this is a very volatile constituency. John, the coalition, mainly the National Party, represents 16 of the 20 poorest electorates in the country. Some Libs now say the Liberal Party's got to roll over and adopt Labor's 2030 targets, which are pretty drastic and they're only 8 years away. That's got to hurt your people.
Well, this is an area where I can't think of a clearer case of where we got to agree the facts and have a quality debate if we're ever going to get high quality policy. And in fact, the business of feeding people, which is what the people in the poorest electorates do in this country, generates around a third in total of greenhouse emissions. So you've got to include those people in the debate. I mean, we've got a food catastrophe coming at us, we're told, by the Bank of England, no less, at the end of this year. Australia is one of the places that can fill it. We can only fill it if we have affordable, reliable energy. There's fact one to keep into account. But there's more than that. I'm really worried about this debate. I'm not a climate change denier. I'm all for trying to, if you like, capture more carbon in agriculture, I'm all for trying to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. It's massive. Half of the world's grain production depends on urea, which is made from gas. Half. The world will starve without that ready supply of gas. But then there are the other simple facts. We know that people are reacting because they think the research shows this. Australians think we generate between 10 and 20% of the world's emissions. We don't. It's 1.1, 1.2, and no less a figure than the former chief scientist, Alan Finkel, warned. We must build our policies around the reality that what we do will not have a major impact on its own. It just won't. So we've got to feed people. We've got to consult with those who are going to bear the burden. And that's where the National Party can play a great role. They've really got to connect with those people out there as they work through the future.
Well, let's hope they find their voice inside the coalition again. John Anderson, Jennifer Oriel, thank you as always.